How do I describe Wendy Lea? Well, I think the best way to describe Wendy Lea is that at her birthday party not too long ago in Napa, where she had 150 Silicon Valley movers and shakers and old friends, about a dozen people whom I spoke to said, you know, Wendy Lea is my best friend. I'm serious, like over a dozen people claimed to be Wendy Lea's best friend. And I thought, okay, this is a woman who scales. In addition, she is an investor, she is a social business visionary, and she's the executive chairman of Get Satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to welcome to the social shake-up stage my good friend, my best friend, Wendy Lea. Here she is.
So let me tee things up. First of all, before we go through thank you, perfect. So here are my colleagues, my very smart CEOs from the US that are going to help me out with this panel. A couple of things before I do that though. One is, last year when we were debriefing the first social shake-up, we got very specific feedback and an idea from Andrew Bowens from MasterCard. Andrew, are you in the room? Okay, maybe not so much yet. So Andrew said, you know, I think we need to learn more about the new things going on, the new technologies going on. And so who's going to be in charge of that? And given my entrepreneurial roots and my love of technology, I raised my hand and said, Robin, okay, let me handle that for the conference. And in fact, I do think that enabling technologies of this new social business world, they're quite critical. So I was happy to put my hand up and pull together this panel. So as we tee up this, we've got about 50 minutes or so, which includes Q&A. There are a couple of things that I want to set up. First is, I'm the old-fashioned one with my paper. We are all social change agents, regardless if we're CEOs of marketing technology companies or we run social media groups inside large companies. It doesn't matter. I think we all have a responsibility to put our best foot forward on behalf of those things we believe and those initiatives that we're moving forward. So I think know that we fall into the same category as you. I do think that we're all very, very dependent on innovation to drive these efforts. So this innovation can come from creative perspective that gets put through infographics or other digital assets. It can come from the technology. It can come from process and organizational structure. But the innovation required to keep this movement afoot, to keep us moving forward, is quite significant. So I think that's a theme that we're going to play out. And as we drive innovation, be it from the process, from the structure, or from the technology, I think we also have to keep in mind that there are some top-level objectives that we just have to own. And that has to do with improving brand image. It has to do with acquiring new customers. It has to do with retaining existing customers and making sure that they are more loyal. So that matters not what industry we're in, if it's business to business or business to consumer, or as Brian Kramer would say, human to human. Those are the planks that we all measure ourselves around. So as we go off into our stream of consciousness up here, keep in mind that those are top of mind. So let's talk about the CEOs. And thinking about who would really bring value to you as members of this very important community, I wanted not just the latest and hottest technologists from all the incubators and accelerators that I participate in, but I really wanted to select CEOs that had deep expertise in the domain of marketing, as well as those that were forward-thinking around technology. And I'm really excited that I think that's what we have. So without further ado, here's how we're going to play it. We're going to go through some very quick introductions, so you'll know the cross-section of the big brains that are sitting with me today. After that, we're going to actually follow an agenda that sounds like this. First, we're going to do some perspective, table setting around perspective. We're not analysts, right? But we, like you, have been in this field somewhere between 7 to 5 years, and there's been a lot going on, as Brian and Robin talked about. So I think we need to table set with some perspective without being analysts. We're going to talk about market perspective, and then perspective from talking with lots of customers, both on the big brand side as well as the high growth startup side. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to go deep into the capability that we bring to the table. So that's product and service capability that's unique to these companies. And so we can talk a bit about that. So that's mainly on the content side and on the insight side. Because at the end of the day, those are a key part of social everything. So that's going to be good. And then we'll wrap it up with kind of a view for going forward and some questions. Does that help? So you'll kind of know how we're going to play this out. Okay, with that, let's do some introductions. Let's go.
Hey, I'm Bob Gilbreath. I'm a co-founder and president of Ahalogy. We help large brands do marketing on Pinterest, which is a very exciting new platform. Been working on it about 2 years. I actually started my career in brand management at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and then had an interesting, kind of touched all the bases of, after that went to the agency side, was an owner of an agency that we later sold to WPP, and spent about a year on the investor side before starting this company as well.
Okay, so very kaleidoscope of experience that we can draw from this panel. Satya?
Good morning. My name is Satya Krisnaswamy. I'm the founder and CEO of NextPrinciples, which is a Bay Area startup. I call myself a boring old enterprise software guy. I've been in enterprise software all of my professional life. I spent 15 years at SAP, and I've been in the CRM and customer experience space since the mid-90s. And essentially, what NextPrinciples does is provides a social marketing automation solution that helps our customers to make more meaningful use of social media and essentially drive demand generation in terms of identifying new customers, potential customers, or enhancing data about existing customers that already lie within the landscape.
Okay, cool. Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason Lankow, and I was the CEO and co-founder of an agency called Column 5, and still alive and well. But we incubated a product called Visage, which I became the full-time CEO of in March of this year, and we do custom branded reporting. I also teach visualization of information at Columbia University.
Fantastic. My name is Doug Bewsher. I think I'm the only CEO who's not the founder on this panel, apart from perhaps Wendy.
That's right.
So I work for a company called Leadspace. Tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. I also have a long history of marketing. I started at Unilever as a brand manager in London, so arch nemesis of P&G. Many good fights we've had in the past. I was then at McKinsey for many years during the dot-com boom, when we were sort of discussing whether email was actually going to be a marketing tactic that worked, which I think we've proved and then disproved over time. And then I've done a number of CMO jobs. So I was chief marketing officer at Skype, which is one of the big social media platforms, if you will. Most recently, I was chief marketing officer at Salesforce, which obviously the social enterprise and now the customer company was very much aligned around social. And now I'm the CEO of Leadspace, which is really thinking about how do you use social information and the web to really transform the way companies do B2B demand gen. So back to you.
Okay, great. So my peeps. I introduce you to my peeps, my very smart peeps, who we all sell software. Don't tell anybody. Right? We bring a lot to the table, but we all sell software. So I've got 2 slides that I think will speak to us all, those who provide software capability and those who acquire it and implement it. So I want to pull those slides up. Please help me with that. Okay. This is a mind map, an eye chart. This is the world you as marketers live in. It's a cloudy, crowded, fascinating, filled with innovation world. And there are two slides. There's the content marketing slide. This is LumaScape, by the way. They're an investment banker, boutique investment banker. They do great research. But this kind of explains it all. So when Robin and Brian are talking about the history of social, getting close to customers, the philosophical angles that we all deal with, then at the end of the day, you and your colleagues get to talk to, or not, these providers of these capabilities. And it's complicated, and there's a lot of it. And at the end of the day, again, back to our mandate to improve brand equity, improve customer acquisition, keep customers, these tools are critical to the foundation, but it's how they get used and how they get integrated and what value they bring. So I just thought I would give that eye chart to just, put some perspective into this. Now, speaking of perspective, let's start with market perspective. And I think Doug is going to help lead that conversation. I'm going to hand it over to you with just a few thoughts.
Sure.
So, like many of you, and certainly like you, Satya, and maybe many in the room, I have been involved in customer relationship management, both on the process and technology side for 3 decades. So I've seen a lot come and go and everything in between, a long history. There's one thing that I know for sure that has been consistent, and that is the desire of a company to have a relationship with their customer. Now, we expressed it in different ways over the years. There's no doubt about it. And we use lots of different strategies and tactics and technologies to build that relationship. But as Brian and Robin said, there's no CEO on the planet that would say they didn't want that. Now, as soon as they said that, we used to sell them technology that was really inside out, not outside in. So I, in particular, have been fascinated, intrigued, engaged with this quest of let's don't forget that relationship exists. Let's also respect, though, that technologies are critical for us to scale that relationship, right? And so with that, Doug, share with me and us, more importantly, what you're seeing now from a market landscape standpoint.
Yeah, sure. And I think it is very interesting, and Brian talked about it as well. Sometimes we use the words CRM and social kind of in the same context of each other, almost interchangeably. And I find that very helpful because I think all these terms, marketing, CRM, social, they all play in the same space. And Brian had the luxury, in a sense, I think, of talking a little bit about the sort of higher level picture in terms of behaviors. And it's sort of our challenge now to talk a little bit about the technology, which I think both enables us to scale, but also actually enables us to do what we want to do in the social landscape. What I see, and I've seen, for a number of years now, sort of from the various places I've sat, is kind of us being in the third wave of a set of transformations that are going on. So I often describe it as the first thing we did in this space was really about data collection, right? Whether that was in the CRM land, it was capturing the people you want to engage with wherever it is, building databases. Maybe in social that was trying to capture people's Twitter handles or Facebook addresses or whatever. It was really about a data collection process, and that was kind of the genesis of many things. I think then we saw this big transformation happen. Salesforce was part of that, but other tools as well, which was really about process automation. So that was then the question about how do we turn that into a process? Buddy Media being a classic example of that. how do I really do a process around how I do Facebook advertising? But other things we see, KLM is an amazing example around how they do customer service on Twitter. These are all process-oriented activities that use the tools and technologies to change the way that we can actually do things. And I think we're really in the very interesting next third stage now, which is really about insight and analytics that sit on top of those, what I would call those process automation engines, if you will. What's the fuel that lives in those jets? And I think, we're starting to see those insights. So when I ran Chatter, which is obviously the social elements of Salesforce, yes, you could capture the information around leads and contacts, and yes, you could kind of capture lots of data in there, and I'm sure many of you use it. But really the question that I would always get from customers is, okay, but tell me who the expert on XYZ topic is. And that's a level of insight that's driven from all of this social understanding and process that we put in place that really transforms the way organizations work. And what I'm doing at the moment in Leadspace is taking that same approach to saying, how do we actually use the web and social as a database of record instead of thinking about our traditional customer data set to do that? So I think that's the kind of big trend that we see going on, and I think there's a number of enablers for that. I think first, obviously, is the rise of NoSQL data sets and unstructured data, which I'm sure we could talk about forever and bore everyone to tears about. But I think there's two other important things. One is just this creation of these platforms. I think really now everything is becoming platforms and APIs, and that means that we're getting these Lumascapes like we see, because now the question is, how do I connect all of these different dots with each other? Because it's very connectable. I think programs like If This Then That are fantastic. How you can really start thinking about this as an ecosystem of working together. And then the other change is, I think, a lot more process-specific versus technology-specific solutions. So think of a Gainsight or a Tatango, very focused on one piece of that process. We're very focused on prospect discovery. So I think these process-specific solutions happen. So what does that mean? I think, some of the changes we'll talk about as, how do we implement that? First, I think we have to understand that Lumascape. And I don't think there's any easy answer to that, but we've got to start to experiment quickly. I think secondarily what I see, and I've always encouraged my teams, is to think about analytics in a different way, and we have to be a little bit more sophisticated in it. I often tell my teams, the only thing you know about the data and analytics you do is it's wrong, right? And it's not really the question about whether it's right or wrong, whether it's the right attribution, it's can this help me take the right sets of actions? Can it help me inform the decisions that are really going to happen? And I think if we can then finally turn that into how do we re-engineer our processes. Again, I've worked on driving through social, whether it was LinkedIn or others, huge number of leads into a funnel for me when I was in B2B marketing. But unless I change the way that was handled in the marketing organization and the sales organization and think about that end-to-end process, we as social people, if you will, social evangelists, we have to shake up the whole organization, not just the little piece. And I think that's a good challenge for us all.
And just to riff a little before we go to customer perspective, because Satya's going to help us with that. I remember the point at Get Satisfaction. I mean, I fell so in love with Get Satisfaction. Again, I'm not a founder, but I so believed in the philosophy that Thor, Lane, and Amy created with Get Satisfaction. I mean, it just took my heart away. And then I realized the software aspect of it and what was required to make it work inside organizations, the integration, not just the technical integration, but the process integration, all the structure. But I remember the year, I think it was a couple of years ago, and I was Brian's been one of my teachers through this whole movement. But I remember someone saying, well, now we have to do ROI. And I just freaked out. Not because didn't understand the need for that. I'm like, okay, we're screwed now, right? And I said that because I've been in CRM for so long, and I remember that once we started doing those ROI calculators, it really got ugly, right? Yet, at the same time, I knew that it was possible to measure the result.
Right.
I knew that. I mean, it wasn't like I was naive to that, but I didn't want the heart part of it to be messed up so soon. But then that was also an indicator that things were moving on, right, in a good way. That businesses were trying to consume the right technologies to drive the right result. But I remember feeling a little conflicted. Now less so. right? Because I'm tireder. And I'm like, okay, ROI, let's make it happen, right?
Well, I mean, and just to build on that, I think one of the wonderful things that community platforms have done, and it's I think beholden on all of us who make technology in this space, which as we all know is quite hard to measure, is that there's a very clear, hard metric, which might be, you reduce your customer service costs, right? That gives you your ROI, but it may not be the reason we do it.
That's right.
We may do it for the customer interaction.
Right.
One of the things that we do at Leadspace is we say, we will generate you $5 million in pipe from this investment.
Right.
Okay, very hard metrics. You can take that to your board, put it in the bank. But the real reason you do it is because you might build better customer understanding, better insights about who you're actually trying to engage with.
That's right.
And I think we have to be clever about how we enable the marketeers who use the solutions to be able to tell that story, build the business case, but can also evangelize about bigger benefits which might be harder to measure.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. So Satya, you have a long history dealing with very large customers, right, at SAP. And although you describe yourself as an old enterprise software guy, I would take issue with that, because I think that regardless of your age, I think you are very relevant around this world of social business and the technologies required. So give us your quick take, if you don't mind, on what you're hearing from real customers every day and how they're consuming or embracing not just the philosophical part of social business, but the technologies required to drive it.
Okay. So yeah, I think we indeed live in very interesting times. I just want to pick on two of the points that I think really make sense here. One is more internally focused within the organization, and the other one is more externally focused. So picking on the internal portion, I think where I see personally, and you're right, we speak to companies every day, one of the consistent challenges is that unfortunately many of the companies have started their whole foray into social media by creating silos out of their social media practices, out of their social media teams. And what this has led to is also, on the other hand, a focus on what I call as vanity metrics, which is about the likes and the impressions. And all that was good in the early days, but increasingly is leading to a sense of fatigue within the organization with the social media teams, because no one else really understands what these things stand for, and they don't understand, just as you guys just spoke about ROI, they don't see how those things essentially can translate into business results. So I would say that one of the fundamental challenges that we have here in this room, and I'd like to throw to the participants here, is to think about how every one of you who is in a social media role can make yourselves more relevant to others within the organization, even within marketing. For example, I was recently speaking to a very senior person in demand gen, and within the first meeting, 5 minutes of meeting her, she said, "Don't talk to me about my social media team because they're a bunch of kids," right? And that's, I think, a very unfair characterization, but unfortunately, that's what is turning out to be the case in many cases, the perception. So the social folks need to figure out how to become more relevant to the rest of their business colleagues. And then quickly on the second part, the external portion, I think the other interesting dynamic we see is this constant tension between should we have an agency or should we not have an agency? And I think we had that with many other parts of marketing, demand gen and so on, and that's come full force into social media as well. And I think that's an interesting sort of dynamic right now, because there are companies that I've dealt with where the client knows exactly what they want. They're using an agency to get some of the execution done and to scale the execution. But there are also the other end of the spectrum, companies who completely give up control to the agencies and who absolutely don't have a thought of their own and just blindly do what the agency asks them to do. And I think given everything else that's been talked about in the earlier session and earlier in this panel, I think that's a very, very dangerous strategy. You can't give up things like customer relationship to an agency. So I think those are the sort of two main points I want to start by talking about.
That's awesome. Thanks very much. So the last piece of, or dimension, I should say, of perspective that I want to round off this section with, and again, I'm watching the clock here, is really comes from a colleague, and many of you may have worked with or know Pete Blackshaw. Raise of hands if you've been around him or follow him. So Pete has an amazing background. I mean, he too was a P&Ger. He was an entrepreneur. In the early days, he had a company called Planet Feedback. And now he's running, then he was part of Nielsen, and now he runs digital and social Global Digital and Social at Nestle's. Good friend of mine, also a very good teacher for me as I've gone through this phase of my own career. Recently, he posted or did an article for Ad Age that I was really stimulated by, and I'd encourage you to check it out. It was just last week, I think. And he mentioned, want to be a better leader, managing digital dualisms. I mean, Brian, this is kind of right up your alley. But it was an interesting perspective to tease out the reality of managing all these, what can seem like extreme conflict, but really, there's a lot of alignment there. One of the digital dualisms that he referenced was called stimulation versus integration. And it's almost like when I first read it, it was like putting the heart paddles to the heart of an organization based on some crisis that happened, and there are so many, versus now being at the third stage, talking about, referencing Doug's comment, about integrating the technologies and the structure and the process so we can be part of a bigger whole. And I don't say that esoterically, I say that to drive very aggressive goals that we all have. So I wanted to get Bob's perspective. You know Pete well, and so why don't you riff a little on that perspective, this dualism in digital?
Yeah, we have kind of interesting interweaving careers. I actually was an intern at Procter and did a volunteer assignment as he was trying to get Procter into digital for the first time back in like 1998.
Wow.
And when he went to the startup side, I was still there and became his first customer. And we just recently won some business with Nestle. Yeah, we were the first one when I was a Tide assistant brand manager. But I think it's that, simplify it a little bit. There's this processization dynamic versus shiny object. And I think that's one of the things you just see the pattern again and again, team by team, company by company, that everyone wants to play one or the other. And it's really dangerous. I think the point of Pete's article, and once you start seeing the same movie over and over again, you realize that, sorry, the world is not black and white. And as a leader, your job is to think and help break out of that, because you're not going to win. Just in the past week, some things we've seen, and talking to really big companies about Pinterest, it's not really just social. It's actually had shades of search. It's content marketing. Often we get in and we see teams arguing about, well, I think it belongs in the search bucket because they have money, or it's over in the social bucket, or it's in the content bucket, and no one gets anything done until you, unfortunately, kind of ladder it up to someone more senior who has the ability to kind of see the forest for the trees. I mean, we see this, sometimes you'll talk to a company that says, great, I need special vanity analytics because I need to see, some other company says that they can show us the number of followers who pin your stuff. I can tell you that doesn't matter. That doesn't drive results. But wait, we think we need that. No, stop trying to just put it into the bucket. On the other hand, I was talking to one of the biggest car companies in the world last week, not Ford, but they said, wow, we're killing it on Instagram. We haven't figured out Pinterest yet, but because we dominated Instagram, we need to dominate Pinterest. And they're literally ready to give us a 6-figure check. And I'm saying, no, don't. Because first we need to sit down and tell you what winning on Pinterest is about, which is not, let's just take your Instagram image and cut it vertically. Like, it's a lot different. I don't want the money of someone who just wants to get the shiny object, because they're not going to follow it through. We're not going to have success. And at this point in my life, at least in this company, enough of kind of selling something people say they want. We really have to be able to give them what they need, which is kind of what marketing's all about. Whether it's Henry Ford saying, I'm not going to give you a better buggy whip, or Steve Jobs saying, I'm going to give you, the right MP3 player, the right phone. I mean, we've got to be able to, especially come from the startup side, be able to not just give them what they say they want, but what you guys really need.
So a couple of, to further one of your points that we talked about this morning, and this is before we go down into products. So Jason, we're going to go straight over to you with content. So one of the realities is that there is a lot of capability to look at, consider, acquire, integrate, to align with a strategic direction. And we talked a little bit about login fatigue. So you're talking to marketers, both in agencies and in companies, large and small, that are dealing with dashboard craziness, right? I've got my Hootsuite dashboard, I've got my Get Satisfaction dashboard, I've got my Marketo dashboard, God knows, I mean, I don't want to leave anyone out, right? However, like, what's going to happen there? Where are we going to go with this whole, there's cloud, we love cloud, I love cloud, but that also implies that there's so many different ways to bring in capability, and how does all that come together, either through the company or the agency? What's your idea around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, if it becomes that processized where everything is just done with a desktop screen, eventually you don't need screens anymore because this can all just get automated. So if you look at your job as just making sure there's enough tweets in the system or something like that, I mean, you might as well move on somewhere else because that's just not necessary. It doesn't change the game. So I think that there's going to be technology, you know, again, a company that I think we are going to have a bursting of the login bubble, if you want to call it that. I had a company the other day, CMO said, look, I'm not buying anything else that I have to have a password and user ID for.
Well, look at the Lumascape. Remember
right?
the Lumascape, right? Good grief.
And, you know, look.
Log in, each one of those separate.
And there's a lot of companies, all those companies have boards telling them, here's your magic number, and here's how many calls you have to have, and your purchase funnel, and how everybody's email is on 25 different lists, and you're getting better and better at sorting those out. I mean, it's somewhat the game that's being played, but, you know, it's time for a shakeout, I think, of how that works. I think big marketers would love everything to just consolidate into whichever of the 3 flavors of cloud that you want. But I got to tell you, those companies are not innovating. I mean, the reason we're here is that those companies don't have the best and brightest building their software, looking at what's next. You know, I'm interviewing people who are working at those companies, and they say, yeah, they're just going to check the box with Pinterest or check the box with Instagram. They're not going to dig into what it's really about. So, you know, it'll constantly be a mode of, we're going to figure something out, we're going to make a process, and then we're going to kind of leave it alone. But I was going back to the wave comment, there's going to be a next wave.
Yep.
And our jobs is to figure out what that wave is and help escort the companies into it, then spot the next one, think, develop new process, and be ready for what's next too.
So we've officially wrapped up perspective, market perspective, customer perspective, and some new thinking around digital perspective. So thanks for that. So let's dig into the capabilities. As much as I can riff and almost make fun of, there's so many cloud providers, including Get Satisfaction. There are, I think, some core planks. If you're in the business of providing social solutions and consuming social solutions, today at least I want to talk about 2 key planks in that strategy on the technology side. One has to do with content marketing. And as we were prepping this morning, Doug mentioned, well, content and content marketing, let's don't confuse those because they are different. So I appreciated that perspective a lot. And then I want to talk about insights, which is time to kind of bring that home, right? And I've been hearing about voice of customer for at least a decade, you know, through surveys and, you know, focus groups. So I think I want to really weigh in on those 2. I'm going to ask Jason to lead on content. Because of the unique perspective you've developed, especially over the last 5 years, and kind of delivering infographics, those very things that Brian was making fun of, that we'll all have 6 of when we get back online. But also realizing that without rich and relevant content, the marketing machines don't move. Right? So we have to find a way to deliver high quality, right, highly engaging, consistent content. So share your perspective with our social evangelist around that, because I think you're one of the smartest people I know in that area.
Well, thank you. I really liked the thing that Brian mentioned about mediumalism, and For us, when we first started introducing infographics to content marketing about 7 years ago, it wasn't about trying to just discover the format to end all formats any more than text or video have value in and of themselves. It's about what you put into that vehicle. So infographics for us became there was some novelty factor there, but they were particularly useful in their ability to explain and kind of distill complex information and help people engage with content that might otherwise be somewhat overwhelming. And I think we made this mistake, and plenty of people make the same mistake, which is taking a format that could theoretically help make things more clear and just cramming as much information as possible into them and kind of perpetuating the problem. So, but beyond that, one of the things that we really observed is that, and kind of riffing on the content versus content marketing, there's kind of dictated by budget, there's only certain content that actually seems to deserve good design in terms of where dollars are spent, and that ends up being content marketing. So we start seeing, there's money to spend on this visual press release or to, get content out there and build brand awareness. But over time we started observing, wow, people are coming to us for internal decks and internal reports and customer-facing reports and communication. And we've started seeing this trend of allocating resources and money behind applying good design thinking also to what happens after somebody becomes a customer. So I think content, even when you think of content marketing, it's not just about that top 10 list or top 16 list or the BuzzFeed type content, but how you communicate and speak to your customers at the customer success stage, which is the stage where we've seen a lot of the good design stops, and it's like, all right, we hooked you with our Super Bowl ad and our beautiful, consistent library of assets, and now screw you, here's a spreadsheet, wade through it and find your own insights on how we succeeded for you.
Have a good day.
Yeah, so that's an area that's really interesting to me to address is, how you also then, you might not have 5 or even 4 figures to spend on each report that you are delivering to, potentially thousands of customers, or the time to, feed out each one with a creative brief. So I'm really interested in that next stage of really empowering, the marketer or, everyone in an organization to communicate, in an on-brand, high level of design fashion.
And I think one idea that you raised this morning that I have not thought of, or at least not in the context you brought it forward, which is cultural content and just how that can be a new wave. Why don't you introduce that concept a bit, because I think our members in the social media today community would be especially interested.
Yeah, this is an area that I was really passionate about with the agency before I moved on into the product. But for us as a small company, we had a lot of these moments of like, why the hell are we even doing this, or what are we really trying to accomplish here? And we did some really powerful thinking on our DNA and really articulating and refining our own cultural foundation. And we started finding, wow, this is really cool information and really meaningful to us. This is a pretty rich well to draw from in our creative as well. So I really like this idea of culture marketing and taking, really articulating right down the line in a logical order, what's our vision, mission, and values, and then not just hammering those exact statements over people's heads, but using them potentially even just as an undercurrent of your communication, and kind of a foundation for generating richer creative. So for us, for example, with column 5, we had our 5 columns, and which were our key values, and we went through a process there where we said, okay, we want to send something out to our key customers, and we took one value, which is be good to each other, and we didn't just say, here's an email blast about being good to each other, here's an article about being good to each other. We commissioned 3 artists to show kind of unusual examples of animals in nature who are surprisingly good to each other. And then, had these limited edition prints shipped to each of those customers. So that's a good example of kind of taking those foundational statements and then creating from them.
I think we attempted to do some of that at Get Satisfaction, but not consciously. And I think you probably influenced us to be more explicit about it, and it worked for us, right? Especially in the early days. So I just thought that concept to be interesting for us. So we're going to bring it home now. We've got, I want to talk about insights. So I have been, again, fascinated by the amount of transactional data we've always had. Yay us on the CRM side, tons of transactional data. Yet now we're in the middle of this tsunami of unstructured data that is coming from our hearts and heads all the time about products and services and brands that we have passion about. And so it's not like you have to ask me. I am always providing that feedback. And I know you're listening because you buy a bunch of listening technologies. My confusion is, after you listen to me as a consumer, Delta Airlines, United Airlines, whatever, and yes, I'm one of those, but after you listen to me, what then, right? How does that expression get converted into a better, more meaningful product and service? I mean, that's the promise that we started at Get Satisfaction, many of our companies have. So where do we go with that? Doug, why don't you tee that up? And I want us all to get involved in this, because this is, I think, the root of what social should be about, is listening and learning and applying. Help me out.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, right? And it's the nirvana, and I don't think it's any different from actually what we were trying to do before when we conducted market research, in a sense, and it's always been the challenge. So there's a few things that I think we won't do with it, right? Okay. So one of the things I don't think we're going to do with it is the idea that somehow there's going to be some big black box out there that's going to tell us the answer, right? I think there's a lot of technologists, especially, sort of have this sort of machine learning, we'll figure it all out for us, and we don't need to do anything, we'll just sit back and let the world take over. Right? And, I think that we've seen through the lack of success of marketing resource management or any black box approach in marketing, it doesn't work, because you've got to connect the dots between driving the right insights about that data and doing something, right? If you don't create that connection, then it doesn't work, right? We see it in what we do all the time. If you're, giving leads over to a sales team based on some algorithm that says these are the guys you should go after without any understanding of what's behind it, you'll instantly get rejection from the other side. That marketing sales interface won't work. So we've got to apply both subjective and analytics to it, together, right? So, and the second thing that I'd say is, I think there's some mindsets, actually, we talked about there, in this idea that I do X and therefore there's a response Y. Right? I think I think the real question is, if you sort of, some of the other unstructured data, let's just take an example. I put my profile on LinkedIn. That's actually unstructured data. But it's not quite the unstructured data in terms of people thinking about like tweeting and posting and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a massive richness in this data in lots of different directions that can help me really understand the customer and use that then as marketeers to do the digital creativity to connect the programs we run to the insights, versus I think sometimes we stick more at this sort of direct response mechanic, do A, then B, right? So I think, the solution for me is how do you connect the campaigns that you run with the customer insights, whoever you're dealing with, right, to put those two together in a way that you can drive increased results. There's never a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet out there. But if you could improve it by 10 or 20 or 30%, then I think you're making the steps in the right direction.
But Satya, we're busy. So I get bored even hearing myself talking about taking action, actionable insights. I mean, after a while, that just feels like jargon to me. Just got to say, right? I know it shouldn't be, but it feels that way. So how can we make it easier for us inside organizations to take action on all this insight? I mean, that means you have to get people together, you have to pull all the data together, and then you have to go tell product to get off their backside and do something with it, like on the roadmap. And I mean, it just seems, am I being negative about this? Help me.
No, I don't think you're being negative about it. I think you're being real.
I'm being grumpy.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's
That's
it's
natural.
still not enough caffeine in our bodies. I think you're being real about it, Wendy, and the fundamental challenge is simply because, if you combine the Lumascape with all the different ideas that we talked about for the last 45 minutes, there's just too many things going on for any person in a marketing team to really sit there and say, okay, this is how we should bring all of these together. It's just not humanly possible, and it makes it even worse when you have a committee, because you cannot make these decisions by committee. One of the ways I've seen this succeed in a few of the forward-thinking customers that we have worked with is to start with metrics. I know it sounds boring, and it sounds sort of not cool enough, but if you have...
And then work backwards
Exactly right. So you have a couple of business objectives or metrics, translated into metrics, and then you work backwards to figure out what are the different parts of the puzzle that need to come together to make that thing happen. Right? So that way you're not... It all sounds good for us to be sitting here, and we come from the tech bubble of the valley, to be saying, every digital marketing stack should look like this and have these 10 components, and that's the ideal world. People in the real world are not living in that bubble. So I think it's much better if every marketing organization, at least as far as the social digital space is concerned, doesn't try to bite off more than what it can chew, picks one or two of the metrics, decides how to actually start executing on them, checks out the results, and then you have, again, the jargony stuff of fail fast and fail forward.
Yep.
But at least do that instead of embarking on some 5-year mega plan, which you have no way of measuring the success of until the end of the 5th year.
So the last little thread I want to pull on is in this area, Bob, is with you, because I've had the good fortune of working closely with Procter & Gamble for the last 5 years, with Kellogg's too, but with P&G in particular. And I've seen a lot of changes in the Consumer Insights Group. At P&G, we call it CMK. New technologies, new strategies and technologies. What do you see happening in that world, in the packaged goods world, in the retail world, that would help us kind of learn more so we can take actionable insights? What do you see?
I think almost going to your point of whether it's a specific metric, but you try to, what we love is companies that do have we hate when they've gone too far into the process of, no, we don't do this, we do this exactly this way, we use this only, because that's not thinking. What's better is that when certain companies will say, here's a direction, here's some priorities, right? So, a large company recently saying, you know what, search is a big priority for us. Social's second, and it's far back. So that helps us come in and say, okay, here's where we can help them. They're not saying we're going to, put X% or, in the search and only this type of thing, but it just gives you a way in to help frame what you can bring to the table. It gives the people who are working on the brands, and that's a hard job. When I was there, 80% of my job was getting our TV commercial right, okay? That's one of 50 things you have to do now, if you still have enough budget for TV. So it is, you're always looking for, give me the information shortcuts, and you don't want to have just, if leadership can help give you some of those directions, it does help frame for both sides how to do something innovative.
So we finished? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add...
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay, just wanted to add one thing to that. I think our marketing teams are taking action every single day. right? So I think if we put like social media into this little bucket over here and we say we need special social media actions, then you're going to be in that problem, right? But like we're working with Oracle at the moment, and their challenge is they're taking action every day. It's just have they got the right insights about who their customers are to take the right actions, right? And so I think if we think about that, back to your, those dualisms, right? It's that integration versus innovation. And if we take and actually apply these insights into the job, the actions we're taking every day, I think that's how we solve this conundrum.
So, as we're wrapping up, the way forward, we are about enabling our social evangelists, our social change agents to be more effective in accomplishing their goals. What's the one thing you would give us as we wrap this up to think about innovation, technology, process to further our goals in our social initiatives? One thing.
I'd say ask companies like ours to teach you.
Oh,
That'd be the big, it's free, that's what we want to do. And
SaaS companies love to teach.
But there's a lot of SaaS salespeople out there that are just going through the slides. You can kick them out in 5 minutes. Just literally sit back and go, you know what, I want to make me smarter. And if they do, maybe you want to work with them.
I think that's a good one. Satya?
As an entrepreneur, I have to say, don't give up. Right? That's what I live with. That's my mantra. And I guess for those of you who are the social change agents, it's absolutely applicable. There's been a lot of unfortunate hype around the space. A lot of people say social is dead and so on. I personally believe that we've just, scratched the tip of the iceberg. I think we are just about to start on a second wave where companies actually start seeing business impact or business value from more meaningful use of social. So hang in there, don't give up.
Don't give up. Jason?
Yeah, I think really getting beyond what you do and communicating, how you do it and why you do it is really valuable. And I think even, when you do have an insight, as we've been talking about, how you communicate that really matters a lot.
I guess I'd say we're still early days, right? I mean, there's some times that we think social's kind of done. I think the role of evangelism, right, versus results, the role of being able to, every person in this room, go and still continue to try and engage their organization to do what they do every day differently, not creating this separation is still such a key role to make us successful.
I would say my final play would be, in fact, Vanessa Damara, who's a good friend and also a teacher of mine in this area, she mentioned the other day on a call, I think it's not about doing social, and Brian says this too in Jeremiah, it's about being that, but being that in the context of achieving results for the organization. We're very grateful for your attention this morning. We won't do questions now, but my peeps will be with me for most of today, so you can go up to them and push them on further perspective. Other than that, have a fabulous conference, and I think we have a 10:30 panel set up. Robin, over to you. Thank you very much.